Hey, everybody. It's good to be with you this afternoon or morning if you're still in the Pacific time zone. And I'm really happy to have Catfish Dosch with us. And not only because he's interesting, which he is, not only because he has good products, which he does, not only because he supports the BDR, which he does, but because he jumped in at the last minute and agreed to be with us today after a cancellation. And so I'm really grateful and happy to have you here. Mike, let's talk about Angry Audio and what you're doing.
Thanks, Barry. And it's a pleasure and it's a privilege. So even though it was last minute, it's still a pleasure and a privilege. So thanks for inviting me. I thought about this a little bit when Barry contacted me yesterday or called me yesterday. We chatted a little bit about what we'd talk about. And my first reaction was audio processing because it's really top of mind right now. And even after he and I talked, I went off and talked to Corny a little bit about what I want to talk about, just to run it by a broadcast engineer and a processing expert and say, is this meaningful? Is this useful? Do you think that this conversation would be interesting to broadcasters? And he thought so. So I'm going to talk to you not so much about what we're doing, although that may come up, but I'd really like to talk to you about an observation that I've made. In fact, I'm going to start with an anecdote because I think you guys will really appreciate it. So my anecdote is related to the fact that we're making a processor now that we're selling to live streamers. Okay, so anybody who's doing live stream broadcasting, we make processors for these people. So that could be a radio station that's streaming, but it also could be someone who's running a radio station like thing out of their basement, or it could be a church that's broadcasting their services. You know, they've become like a microcaster at that point, and so it's churches in particular that are kind of interesting to me. So I have had many conversations with church technical directors about their audio. And they know the problem. They will complain about it. And you'll recognize this immediately. They'll say, well, you know, the music comes on, it's way too loud. And then the pastor speaks and no one can hear it. And everyone's complaining about it. And even though we've turned the fader up on the pastor, it doesn't seem to really do the job. You know, so what's going on here? And of course, I laugh and I explain it. And in many cases, the conversation is kind of rough. Because as soon as I say processing, which you guys all understand, it's like, oh, yeah, processor. I know exactly what that is. As soon as I say processing, the church tech guy thinks I'm talking about something else. And he goes, oh, I have compressors. And I say, well, no, not exactly that kind of processing. No, I have compressors, I have limiters, I have EQs, I have all of this kind of stuff. I don't need some silly box that you think you want to sell to me. I'll just go do all of that. And some of them do. They just go away, and I never hear from them again. Some of them go away thinking I've given them the keys to the kingdom. It's a compressor. That's going to fix all my problems. And they go off and they fiddle with it, and they come back and they say, yeah, it didn't really fix my problems. And but this particular anecdote is pretty fun because I was having a conversation with this fellow from the church, and he just wasn't getting it. And finally, I try not to do this because, unfortunately, a lot of younger people, if you mention radio, they think, oh, that's old tech. So it's not a great way to ingratiate yourself to a guy that you're trying to sell product to, even though it sounds great. And we'll come back to that. But a lot of young people say, oh, that's old tech. I don't want to sound like radio. Okay. So this particular guy, though, I mentioned broadcasting. I mentioned radio in particular. And he said, oh, I'm glad you brought that up. I just a couple weeks ago was listening to a radio station in my car, and I heard the most talented audio mixer I've ever heard. And I said, okay, tell me about it. And he said, oh, this guy was amazing. There was this really hard rock song, very loud, and it ended, and then he started speaking, and then there was a commercial, and then there was a soft rock sound, and everything sounded perfect. That guy just nailed it. And I laughed, and I said, that's the box. And he said, oh, really? I said, yeah, that's the box. That's the magic box. That's why radio sounds the way it sounds on tiny speakers, on boom boxes in cars, on earbuds, on earphones, on high-end systems. Radio sounds consistent and good because of this processor. Well, the guy bought it, long story short, and he's very happy. He contacted me after the fact and said, wow, this is amazing, fixed all our problems, and thank you very much. But I've had that conversation so many times now that I've kind of zoomed out a little bit. And unlike many of you who've kind of maybe only worked in radio, I've worked in all the different areas of pro audio. So I've worked in recording studios, designing equipment for them. I've done live equipment, PAs and front of house equipment and broadcast equipment. And so I've worked in a lot of different areas of pro audio. And did you know that radio is the only area where we really do understand this concept of a program audio processor? We just call it the processor, right? I have a processor. I have an Orban. I have an Omnia. I have a, pick your flavor. But you know what that box does. You know why it's there. Sometimes we abuse it in radio, admittedly, and sometimes we get a black eye for that. We crank it up so that there's about -2 lufs of loudness, and we wonder why the listeners aren't staying. But let's accept that as an abuse, because it is, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the loudness wars. I'm talking about just in general, this idea that in radio, we know how to make audio content sound good on any listening device, in any listening environment. And I think we should kind of pat ourselves on the back for that, because there's other people in pro audio that could hugely benefit from what we know, but they don't know what they don't know. And so that's kind of an observation I wanted to share with you is audio processing. What in the world are you talking about? And if you are talking about something, a multiband compressor, okay, well, there's a lot of magic and a lot of science, but a lot of art that goes into making audio processing sound good. And so I thought I'd share that with you and then talk to you a little bit about, maybe we'll segue into streaming, because I've made it, this is Catfish's observation on the industry and processing today, okay? But in streaming, I've noticed something interesting. There's a lot of radio stations in particular that are not processing their streams, which I find really surprising because, but we know better. We know how to make great audio content. We actually have the magic box on the over-the-air signal, and we're not necessarily processing our streams in the same way. And I've talked to different guys about this, and I've gotten different answers. I mean, some answers have come back kind of, well, we don't have the money for that. We kind of focus on the main over-the-air signal, and that's kind of, that's the digital stuff, and no one really listens to that stuff anyways. So, it just kind of is what it is. By the way, the worst example I've ever seen is a radio station that actually had taken a receiver to receive their own FM signal, and then they took that receiver and fed it into the encoder to stream to the internet. That was how they got processing into their live stream. That's pretty disappointing. But I'm more disappointed when I hear radio stations that just drop this stuff raw onto the internet. And aside from the cost issue, I've actually talked to a few guys that have said, I don't really want listeners to listen to the streams. I want them to listen to the over-the-air signal. That's our moneymaker right there. And the live stream business, that's kind of, we do it, but it's kind of almost competitive with our main business. And so, we don't, not only do we not take it that seriously, but we really don't want it to sound all that great. And so this is something I've observed and been a little surprised by. I haven't seen it outside the U.S. The people that are streaming internationally appear to, at least the broadcast types, they all seem to want to go ahead and use processing. And then the hobbyists, they come along. And maybe some of you guys have had these conversations on Facebook, but they always make me laugh. The hobbyists who don't know processing, again, it's that, it's a field where they don't know what they don't know. So the hobbyist will ring in on a processing thread on social media and say, you don't need that. Okay, you don't need that. You don't need processing. In fact, that's the whole benefit of streaming, is that we don't need processing anymore. You need that on radio because it's a crappy signal, but now we have a good signal. And, I'll let you read whatever you want into that. But now we have this good signal. And some of these guys look at processing as some kind of a compromise. They look at it as, well, if I put processed audio on my stream, I'm reducing the quality of my stream. And exactly the opposite is the reality of the situation. And so I thought I'd share some of these observations. I want to talk to you a little bit about one area of the industry that does use audio processing, and we're not happy about it, and that is mastering engineers. Mastering engineers. These guys used to optimize their audio for vinyl, for example. So they would, they'd tweak the EQ and the bass for the transients and everything else to kind of optimize dynamic range for the place on the vinyl that the cutter was, because the inner tracks, you need to do different things than the outer tracks. And so that's kind of where, mastering got made its bones. Mastering engineers these days, they don't really do that. These days, they mash the snot out of the content. And you're probably thinking, yeah, I've dealt with that, right? So you get some content, it's been pre-mastered or over-mastered, I like to say. And so it's got about minus 10 LUFS of dynamic range. And you're scratching your head thinking, okay, I got to run this through my processor and it's going to do more compression and limiting and everything else. It's going to sound bad coming out the back end. And you're not wrong. It's a problem. It's a real problem in our industry. And we have a tendency to kind of look at that and say, well, maybe these mastering engineers need to back off. But you know what? They're actually paying us a compliment if you think about it. What's changed is it used to be that mastering engineers would basically master their music for radio airplay because that was how content was distributed. If I wanted a hit record and I wanted to sell a whole lot of records, what did I need? I needed exposure. I needed radio airplay. So I mastered my material so that it would sound great over the air, of course, right? Well, what are they mastering for now? Are they still mastering for radio airplay? No, they're mastering for digital downloads. I would have said CDs, but then, already that's obsolete. So, these days they're mastering for digital downloads and they're paying us a compliment. Because what they're saying, without really saying it, they're saying it with their actions, is, radio is pretty high energy. Radio sounds good. These tracks, when I used to hear them on the radio, they would just pop. They would be so good. They would be punchy. They would sound good everywhere. They'd sound good on crappy speakers. Radio really got it. So these guys have been trying to simulate what we've done for years in radio, because they assume that most of the time it's not going to be a radio station that's playing this music. And so that's an interesting problem. And I don't know how to untangle it. I really wish I did. I mean, it would be great if we could convince the record companies to distribute music in two forms. You want a mashed form for the consumers? Go ahead and distribute that. But please give us an unmashed form so that we can mash it ourselves, right? I mean, isn't that kind of what we do? So, these are the ramblings and the crazy thoughts of a non-processor guy. By the way, my processor guy, my processing partner is Cornelius Gould, and he's here to correct me if any of my rants go off track and I say something that's inaccurate, because he knows all this stuff.
Far.
Okay, so I haven't lied yet. All right, so
no.
I'll tell you about a recording engineer in Nashville that I met. Great guy. And he was teaching my son piano, coming over to my house, and we'd have chats on a weekly basis every time he'd come over. And he asked me what I was working on. It was a few years ago, and I told him. And he said, processing, huh? You guys are just like screwing up all the, we make great music and then you guys, you screw it up. And I said, well, don't judge us all on the experience of a few, over-aggressive program directors who think that clipping sounds good. But, in general, it's not the processing's fault. It's the people who are driving it and overdriving it that are creating this experience that you think is so foul. He didn't have any kind words to say about radio. And so I tricked him a little bit. I said, well, I do have these streams here that are not processed by radio. They're processed by my partner Corny, and they're optimized to not sound like radio. Would you listen to them? And let's see what you think. Well, to tell you the truth, they were kind of processed like radio, but I told him they weren't. And he went off and he listened to it. Next week he came back and said, those are the best sounding streams I've ever heard in my life. They sounded amazing. What's the magic? And I had to tell him, and his response is going to be really interesting to you. I said, well, it's kind of the same stuff that radio uses. You need to calm down a little bit. It's a little relaxed compared to what you might be used to on some aggressive radio stations. A little bit relaxed. It's a little bit different in that Corny has a recipe that preserves the dynamics, or at least the appearance of dynamics. You kind of get that sense that there's more dynamic stuff going on. But in general, the reason these sound so good to you is one very simple principle, and that is the compression of dynamic range. And he said, but dynamic range is a good thing. And I said, well, it's a good thing if your listening environment is a recording studio. And mine happens to be, by the way. Rolf mentioned this before we got started. What does an audiophile guy like you think about audio processing? I have a treated room. It's a full up recording studio. I hardly use it now, but it's a listening environment. I've got, $10,000 worth of speakers and all that kind of crap and everything else. And the room has been tuned, and I go in there and I listen to music. And generally I don't listen to compressed music, so it has all that dynamic range and it sounds great. I love it. I love the sound of it. Now think about your audience, people who are generally listening to your music, your stream, your station, however you're delivering this content. Do most people have tens of thousands of dollars invested in a listening room? And if they don't, what are they listening on? Well, they're probably listening on earbuds out of an iPhone, right? Or a couple little Bluetooth speakers while they're working out. Okay, so the iPhone is tuned in, and they've got a couple of little Bluetooth speakers, or they're listening in the car. A lot of people still listen in the car, and the audio needs to be optimized for those listening environments, not for how much, it's good. Dynamic range is, let me put it this way, dynamic range, good. It might be if you have a room that can produce 100 dB or reproduce 100 dB of dynamic range might be a nice thing to listen to. I can actually hear the quiet parts. If I'm in a car, maybe if it's a quiet car, I might get 40 dB of dynamic range. So what does that dynamic range buy me now? If I'm listening to something that has a lot of quiet stuff in it and it's just getting buried down in the road noise, why would that be desirable to listen to? And yet, if you think about it, we get this because, we've done it for years and, we just understand this, but the world doesn't. And quite frankly, there's some of us in broadcasting that don't completely understand this now. It's like we've kind of forgotten some of what we've known for many years. And that is that when it comes to delivering content to a market, to an audience, we really do need to optimize it to sound good to that audience. And, I when I was a kid, I used to listen to, K-Earth 101, K-Earth 101 in Southern California. And man, that station sounded amazing. It just sounded amazing. I don't care what you heard, what they were playing. It had a sheen to it, and it had a particular sound. You could be going through the dial. Wasn't necessarily louder than everyone else. We can have the loudness war discussion, but it sure did sound different than everyone else. And that is the radio that I love and I remember and I grew up with, and we still know how to do that. And yet, are we still doing it? Some of us are, but has processing for many of us just kind of become, it's just part of doing business. It's not that special. I got an Orban, I got an Omnia, I got an Angry audio processor. It seems to do the job. And maybe we're forgetting somehow that this is it. This is what makes radio different. And when you go on social media and people will talk about, radio is dying because, content content. You always hear this, you need to produce more content and you need to have more local content. You hear this all the time. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, yeah, content, but content that sounds good, content that sounds the same. Not necessarily a lot of dynamic range, but when I tune it in my car, oh my gosh, I don't need to touch that dial. It just sounds amazing all the time. And so I wanted to share this perspective with you as a non-radio. By the way, I've never been a radio guy. So Steve Church found that out after he hired me, and he was aghast. He was going to cry when I told him that. He said, "You worked in radio, right, Mike?" And I said, "I've never worked in radio, Steve. I'm a tech guy. I design and build equipment. I manufacture stuff." And he, what? How's this possible? How did you never work in radio? As if in order to pass the crucible, the test, you have to have been a radio guy. Otherwise, you're not worthy. And but I have never been a radio guy, so I just these are just observations from a guy that looks at the industry, loves radio, listens to processing all the time. I'll point that out. I'm an audiophile, but 99% of the time I'm listening on my computer speakers. And you know what else I'm doing while I'm listening on my computer speakers? I'm processing it because it sounds better when I listen to it through the processor versus turning it off. Why? Because the speakers are wimpy and my room isn't that great that I'm normally working in, like this one right now. It's not that great a room. It's not treated. I certainly couldn't reproduce 100 dB of dynamic range if my life depended on it. And so I run all my content, whether I'm listening to music or talk or maybe streaming videos. I run it all through Corny's processors. I get them for free, by the way. So I do have that advantage. And but everything now sounds fantastic. And when I hear unprocessed audio now, it sounds like there's something wrong with it. Like the dialogue isn't clear. It's like, well, normally I can hear people speaking, I can hear dialogue and stuff. And, but now I'm straining my ears to try to hear stuff. And the music is a little bit anemic. It's not, sorry, Grady. It's not loud and clean like I like it. I owe you. I'll send you a check for that. So I just figured I'd talk to you guys about processing in general. I also have a little commercial that I'd like to give you. I'd like to talk to you about a new product that we're working on, but that's kind of it. It's kind of my processing rant, and then I'm kind of hoping that we'll just open the floor and talk a bit about processing in radio, and your thoughts. You might disagree with me. You might say, I don't agree. I think processing makes music sound bad, and okay, let's have that discussion. But I kind of wanted to share this with you, and I guess I'll say one other thing about it before I give you my commercial. Is Steve Church? I mentioned him, but he also had this idea. And he was asking me all the time. He was saying, "Mike, what other industries should we push Omnia into?" And it was a great question. He'd ask me, he'd say, "Well, should we make PA systems for churches or for live venues, and we should put audio processing in it because Omnia sounds so amazing." And he was right, but I'd say, "Well, Steve, that's going to bring up the feedback. You understand? We're going to bring up all the open microphone noise, and we're going to make feedback in a live environment. I'm not necessarily such a great idea." And in typical Steve fashion, he'd say, "But maybe we could control that with DSP, So, we'd go off to the races. He always was thinking, what can we do with this tech that we have that no one else seems to really be all that aware of, but it's so impressive when we put it in place. And so the only thing I would ask when we open up the conversation is, let's please not do the my processor's better than yours thing. That's all I ask, only because it's tired. It's like, well, Orband's better than Omnia. Oh, DSPX is better. Really, honestly. And I don't think any of us need to do that. I think we can all kind of agree that everyone in the industry seems to do a really good job these days.
Well, I think actually, when you get to it, it's the question that you asked or that you posed to me, and I asked, what features do you need?
What features do you need? Certainly, yeah. Or
Oh,
what sound are you looking for?
we're going to let folks participate. I'll just mention this again for that reason. Alternate A or alternate A or the space bar will open your microphone, or click on the little thing that says raise hand and we'll call on you. You don't have to wait for an opening because, good grief, there's a lot of us that can talk forever. So, Mike, what features do we need? You started with
Yeah,
compression.
it's a good question. I guess I'm going to say, and I think people are going to argue with me about this, that it's kind of an 80-20 thing. If you remember the Italian mathematician Pareto, he kind of said 80% of life is 20% of, 80% of activity resulted in 20% of results, 20% of activity resulted in 80% of results was kind of the concept. But you start applying this principle elsewhere, and you kind of find that there are usually one or two things that make the biggest difference, and then a whole lot of things that make subtle, nuanced differences. And so I'm going to say in processing, the 80% is the compression of dynamic range. That's the 80%. We can talk about clippers and DSP and FFT and, all the different things that we do and preemphasis and, stereo generation and the injection of RDS and, there's all kinds of things that audio processors do, but 80% of it is the compression of dynamic range.
Now,
That's
if you'll remember, because you were there at Pacific Recorders when Mike and I put out the DAPs. And the DAPs, 80% of it was compression.
There you go,
The
80%.
only clipping there was, or the only limiting there was a diode, which that was on purpose. Mike wanted it that way. He wanted this to work basically as a 3-band compression unit. And that's really, do I call it a breakthrough? It was the beginning, I think, of audio processing for broadcasters. And I don't know if the younger folks know that part of the history or not. But when you talk about compression being important, that's the theme from the beginning.
Well, if we agree that it's the lion's share of it, we might not agree that it's 80%. Maybe somebody would say, "Oh, that's only 60%," but we would agree, I think, universally that it's the compression of dynamic range, or maybe a better way of saying it, without saying compression, because sometimes that's a bad word. Maybe we say optimization. See, Bob Orban had a good term there with Optimod, right? So what we're doing is we're optimizing the dynamic range for the target listening environment. So why does radio sound so good in the car? Because the car is a noisy environment, and radio is the only thing that sounds good in the car. It just does.
You know why that is?
Yeah.
I'm going to go back 50 years. Oh, my goodness, 50 years. When I was at KRLA, you remember KRLA, we sat in the program director's office, and all the new music was auditioned through a 3-inch speaker, little tube on the desk. That's what was deemed the way to identify and pick the right ones.
As it should be. You should be listening on the same stuff, same crappy stuff that your customers are listening on.
Yeah, well, today we have the fight in the control rooms with the jocks that, well, they have to listen to program now because of the HD, but go back a few years and you'd have to fight make them listen off the air. And I remember stations that would be throwing dead air for 6 hours because their processor burped and the jock didn't know. Nor did Rich Wood. He was selling the dead air, I think.
Well, actually, at TM, we would always run everything through Oratones in mono, just to make sure that they would sound good, on radio.
Yeah, every recording studio I've ever been in had a pair of Oratones sitting there, which sound like an AM table radio kind of, but they actually sound pretty good. But if it sounds good on the Oratones, it usually sounded good on just about anything.
Translation. Right. Yeah. I have Oratones in my studio.
If I can jump in for a moment, It's always been my philosophy for 100 years. Because what does the audience want? Back in radio, when the program director and all those people were babbling about it's got to be this way, it's got to be that way, my position was, look, let's just borrow the keys from the receptionist and get in her car. Don't touch the button, tone control, just turn it on and listen. That's what my friend Scott, who's now deceased, brought up to me one day back when I was all in favor of pristine audio. He said, no, don't understand. I'm driving down the road in my truck. My open headers are going, the windshield wipers, because it's raining, are going, windshield, me in a truck. That's your listening environment, not your studio.
Am I the only one having difficulty with Cowboy, or is he breaking up for everybody?
He's breaking up.
Yeah, he's breaking up.
Yeah, Cowboy, you may want to put that on hold because it's painful to listen to. You're coming in and out all the time. Yeah,
we need to close captioning.
Yeah, we need closed captioning for Cowboy. Yeah.
Radio does.
Yeah, his processor is not better than yours.
Yeah, we need processing for iPhones, right?
Yes, indeed.
Well, ordinarily, I would suggest he turned off his video, and that might improve his audio, but
not this time.
No video.
Not this time. So, Barry, you asked the question. So, what do we need? And so, what do we need could be, beyond the obvious, which is optimization of the audio for the target listening environment. There's all kinds of other things we need in broadcasting and radio for a radio processor. And I'd say there's probably this core list that is immutable. Okay, so we need limiting that can control overmodulation. We have to we have to have peak control. We have to have the ability not to exceed legal limits. Okay, so that's immutable. We don't get to say, well, it's kind of close enough. So we need that. We definitely need this this controlled compression. We'd like to have. I'm going to call this a need, but I guess we could negotiate on this. I would like to have a processor that doesn't pump. Okay, so I want multi-band compression, maybe intelligent multi-band compression. Something so that when the bass comes in, the vocals don't drop. Things like that. We're past all that now. To be really honest, I mean, I haven't heard a pumping multi-band processor in decades. So that's why I say we might be able to say at this point that the state of the art is pretty consistent. Even if you still have a favorite, even if Corny's your favorite, Corny's my favorite, by the way. If Frank's your favorite or Bob's your favorite, I think this is okay. I think we can all agree that these guys all know how to build audio processors that do what they're supposed to do. It's maybe at that point that we start talking about nuance.
And that's where Brian comes in and says there's no best of anything until you define what's best for your situation. Now, customization. There we get to that.
Well, I think that for years we have, as broadcasters, and notice how I put myself in your category, even though I admitted I've never actually been a broadcaster. You see how I do that, right? So we broadcasters, for years, have gotten used to spending 10 grand and up for a good processor. It's just kind of the way it is. Like, if you're going to be in a major market, you're going to drop, 5 figures. I guess it's 5 figures on an audio processor. It's just the way it is, and it has been for decades. So the flagships from the big companies are all 10 or 12 or 14 or 15 or $16,000. But we pay that because processing is so important to us. And we used to talk about this at Telos. We'd talk about how someone would spend an extra $4,000 for an extra quarter dB of loudness. It was not, we weren't joking. We weren't laughing about it. It was like, this is serious business. People are actually spending multiple thousands of dollars to get an extra quarter dB of loudness. And so that's a real thing. And I would say perhaps that we've maybe gotten too comfortable at that price point. I'll be honest with you. I kind of look at the landscape of audio processing and I say, why, if you want to be a major market customer, or have a major market sound, should you have to spend 10 or 12 or 15 or $16,000 to get an audio processor that's any good? I think that honestly, we should be able to do that at less than $5,000. We should be able to make a fantastic audio processor for under $5,000. And so that's actually our newest product. We have a new product called the Stereo Toolbox. And if it sounds a little bit familiar, it's because it's got Stereo Tool software running on Angry Audio hardware. And so it's not exactly like it's not exactly like the Stereo Tool you can go and download and put on your PC. It's a purpose-built version of the software to run on this hardware, but it's under $4,000 for the entire box, software included, and it does a lot. In fact, as we were coming up with a list of things to do on it, we just kept throwing stuff at it. Oh wow, we should do this, and we should do this, and we should do this, and we ended up with the entire kitchen sink in the thing. And so it is a pretty amazing product. We have already sold out the first production batch with people not even having heard it yet. So I think it's going to be a pretty popular product. But what have we done here? Have we really repriced the idea of the high-end processor? I think for some people we have, but it's kind of not the point. In other words, the program director who says, I have never spent less than $10,000 and never will on an audio processor because it's too important. We're not trying to convince this guy. He's going to spend the 10 or 12 or 14 or $15,000, and Mary's going to sell it to him, and she's going to be very happy. That's just that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But the guys that I want to serve are the guys that don't have those kinds of budgets. And that's always been the case with Angry Audio. We work at kind of the more budget-friendly edge of the marketplace. And so I look at $4,000 and I say, how much processor can I build at $4,000? And the answer is, wow, a lot. In fact, at $4,000, and there are products from our competitors, and they're not terrible. Okay, but they really don't want you to buy them. You have to understand that. Our competitors don't want you to buy the cheap thing. They want you to buy the expensive thing. So of course they're going to leave a whole lot of stuff out. Oh, you want to do FM and HD at the same time? Yeah, you'll need 2 of these boxes for that. Oh, you want to do RDS? Yeah, this box doesn't do that, but if you buy the more expensive box, we can do that. And you can't blame companies for wanting to run this way. That's smart, but that's not how we do it. We look at the price point and we say, not how little can we do or how much can we leave out in order to get people to buy the more expensive thing. We don't make the more expensive thing. This is it. This is the flagship. And so we put everything in there we could possibly put in. And this is one of the reasons why we partnered with Hans van Zupten, the owner of Timeo, the Stereo Tool guy, because he really gets this value thing. And his products are amazing. In fact, so amazing that some of the competitors are licensing his technology to use in their products. And so we end up having a whole bunch of tech that is very similar to stuff you might find in Omnia 9, for example. It's right there at this new price point. So, that's my commercial. That's the Stereo Toolbox. If you want to find out more about it, there's, Angry Audio, or email me or something. But, we don't have to talk about that any more than I just want to make sure you're aware of it, what we're doing, and the fact that we're shipping next month. And we sold out the first production batch, which is pretty fun. I love it when that happens. People are asking, when are you going to start shipping? And the answer is, well, next month, but that's not when you're going to be able to get one because you don't have one on order yet. So it's kind of fun when the marketplace responds so favorably to a new product. So that's it. That's my commercial thing. Can we open it up and talk about processing? Any aspect you like? You want to do that?
That makes a lot of sense. Again, everyone, space bar to open or alternate A. If you're on a cell phone, you got to do something else like with the 6 or something like that.
Well, I keep hearing about stations that are backing off a bit because it sounds better not to mash. I wish they'd come to my market because stations just sound like hell here. It's all bottom heavy. You know, I unfortunately have a subwoofer, and I hear nothing but thumping and pumping. Lots of that.
Let's turn to Corny for this a little bit, Corny. Talk about the sound again that you're aiming for. And we all go all the way back chameleon here, but now the big thing with Hans is a overreaction, some would say, I'm not saying it, to this unclipping mentality that you can take a system that has been driven crazy by the masters and you can unclip it. Do you agree with that, or do you think that that's just gone too far to recover?
Well, it depends on what it is you're trying to fix. Like there's some, especially like in the 2000s and all that, there were a lot of songs where they intentionally used lots of clip. Oh, my camera shut off. It looks like they used intentionally used lots of clipping for loudness, and some of those recordings just sound pretty rough. So in that case, the declipper does a pretty good job of getting rid of that gross distortion. So so you've got that. Personally, I like to use the declipper on a case by case basis. So I would use it in production to fix something that's overly clipped or whatever, whether it's intentional or by mistake, and then just put that in the library. So that's kind of how I like to deal with it, but it's a useful tool, I think.
Well, we talk about MP3s
Mhm.
that the kids listen to, and you've destroyed the audio. You cannot take an MP3
Right.
and put it back into wave,
Right. Once an MP3, always an MP3.
or worse,
Right.
But the question is here, at what point does declipping, maybe AI makes it better? I don't know, but at what point does I'm mumbling in a way. When I saw Leif's first of efforts, became what, the Omnia 9. I was amazed that you could pull a lot of these clips off and restore them. But has the industry progressed to a point where you can't recover?
Depending on what
Yeah.
they're doing in mastering, if they're doing a lot of heavy limiting, like a heavy look ahead limiting, but not clipping, it makes it harder for the tools to do anything really. They work great if they abused it in one way, but it's kind of like if you listen carefully enough, you might hear a difference on some of the other things. So it's what they're doing is always a moving target. And that's the good and the bad of it. The fact that they're moving targets, it keeps folks like me, Hans, and others busy with work to do. But yeah, everything has a limit.
I don't want to plug our product too much, but I will say that I think whether declipping really works for you or not depends a little bit on the processing that you're using, the target processing. And one thing that I noticed was with Chameleon, it didn't seem to, and this could just be me, and Corny, you can tell me I'm dreaming, but it seemed to me like stuff that had been overmastered tended to sound really good through it without any pre-treatment. Whereas it seemed like some other processors had more trouble with material that had been overmastered. And but that might just be part of your secret sauce, and you don't want to talk about that. But it was interesting to me because I always thought, look, we've got to take this, this overmastered material, we've got to declip it and then process it. That just is the right workflow. And Chameleon kind of changed my mind a bit. Like, okay, maybe that's not always the right workflow.
Well, the Chameleon is all auto tuning, so it tunes itself to what it sees, and when working on the algorithms, of course, it was trained on a lot of that heavily mastered and heavy clip things. So what it does when it sees that stuff, it doesn't do anything to intentionally make it worse. So it ends up being no worse than what it was on the source, rather than adding to it, because it recognizes that stuff, and then other things it'll open up and freely move around and do its thing. So there's that, which I can go on forever on that, but that's not quite our topic today.
Any other thoughts here that we can share with Mike, or ask questions of Mike and Corny about their processing themes?
Generally, I like to, whether by actually adjusting things to have the feel of more dynamics, or by faking the ear out to make you think you're hearing more dynamics. That's kind of my thing. I like the sound of dynamics and transients, and to me that makes music louder versus having it smooshed down. Where my ears smooshed down stuff just sounds quieter than things with nice open transients.
You were heavily into presets. You were heavily into presets.
Actually, I'm more heavily involved with. I like working with the algorithms to try to get the algorithms to do what they do.
But on the other end, on the user end, I mean, you'll twiddle with whatever you got in your shop there.
Yeah.
But when you lay it out for folks in the field, I'll give you an example, and maybe you can talk off that.
Okay.
I had a station call me in and talk about their processing, and they had an Orban inside. Not the worst processor in the world, not the best processor in the world. But when you go into the GUI and you look at the number of adjustments that can be made, it reminded me of the program directors that used to run around with greenies, and they get their hands on the early Optimods, and then they wonder why the station sounded so crummy.
Let's chat about that for a bit, because I'm actually glad you brought that up, Barry. And I'll Corny, you correct me, because I'm going to talk about you. And so if I get any of this wrong, you have to fix it. But each of these processing gurus, they kind of have their own recipes. They kind of have their own approaches. And so I look at somebody like Hans, and his thinking, his philosophy toward audio processing is, I will give you absolutely every control that you can possibly ever imagine needing, and then some. So there are thousands of ways to make stereo tools sound bad. There really are, because he gives you way too much range on way too many things, but you might just be an expert. You might be a Grady. And so you would be able to dial in and do exactly what you wanted. Very surgical, okay? So this is his philosophy toward audio processing. And in that environment, you need presets. You have to have presets. If you walked up to this box and you just tried to drive it, from scratch, you probably would have some difficulty unless you were an expert. So you kind of start with presets and then adjust them a little bit to taste, which is the way most people adjust processing. They usually start with something that's kind of close, and then they trim some things. I want it a little brighter. I want it a little looser. I need a little more bass, or whatever. And but I'm going to take you the other extreme, because Corny is different. When we first started working together, he said he would drive around in markets where they had Omnia 11, and he would hear it sound bad, and he would get mad, because, like, what are you doing to my product? You're making my product sound bad because you're twiddling the controls the wrong way, and he'd want to stop at the stations and bang on the door and let me in, let me at your processor, let me fix it for you. This is ridiculous, right? And so when the Chameleon line was launched, it was kind of revolutionary in that it doesn't really give you a lot of controls. And in fact, in some cases, it gives you virtually no control.
We're back to what I was saying. He's a preset guy.
Well, hang on. It's not a preset. So, a preset is actually a collection of parameters for the processor. Okay, so if you think about a preset on an Orban or an Omnia or a stereo tool, it will be a collection of parameters that have been set for a particular format. And by definition, A preset is a set of compromises. Why do I say that? Because if you build a preset for talk and it sounds great on talk, run some music through it and you're going to be disappointed. So it's obviously been optimized for a particular format, and you need a different preset for a different format.
I didn't say presets were bad. I simply said that
Neither did I.
the majority of users out there,
Right.
Corny has found that many of them will simply do a preset and walk away.
Well, let me finish explaining this, Barry, because it's a little different than a preset.
I would jump in and real quick and just say, yeah, Barry, in that regard, Barry's right, because most people just pick a preset. But what Catfish is getting at is a little different. I know where he's going. So.
Yeah, what I'm talking about is the fact that that you don't need a preset with Chameleon, and that's the new thing. That's what's different, is that the processor itself is adjusting its parameters based on content that's coming through it. And so this is a little bit different than the way the other guys approach it. It makes some people uncomfortable. You know, we have a big customer who has coined this phrase: if I buy Chameleon, it's in Corny I trust. And that you know, he has to be comfortable that Corny is making all these decisions in the first place that are going to be good decisions for all the kinds of content that he's going to shove through it. By the way, he's been very happy, but he was skeptical. And so this is different. And another way of thinking about it is, probably this would explain it the best. I had a customer recently that contacted us and said, I need some way of automatically switching between two presets on Chameleon. I want one that's optimized for music and one that's optimized for talk, because that's what he's used to. It's always been that way. If I have a news format, I want this preset, and if I have a music format, I want that preset. And so, we talked about it for a little while, and I explained that it's going to adapt to whatever you feed into it. So why don't you just find a preset that you like and listen to talk and music and see if it doesn't work on both of them? And he said, oh, that's ridiculous. That's not going to work. Well, he did it. He came back. He called back and he said, oh, man, this is amazing. I used the talk preset on music and it sounded amazing. Okay, so that kind of led us to thinking a little differently about how we approach presets to begin with, because it's confusing that, anytime you see something that's a preset and it sounds like it's format based, it kind of limits your thinking. If you see something that says hot talk, you're never going to want to run music through it. And yet running music through hot talk is exactly the sound you're looking for. So we're kind of backing off format based names of things, so that you're more inclined to try different things to see what you happen to like. So that's the preset versus automatic adjustment discussion.
Yeah, in terms of things like, when you get into the hundreds of controls and things, a lot of that has to do with, with every compressor type thing you've got going on, there's an attack and a release for it. And you may have other things that are involved with that. And when you have the kitchen sink thrown at folks with most processors, it ends up being hundreds of controls that they have to mess with. And after spending hours on some stuff, you'll get it to sound okay. But then you always have that collection of songs that make you cringe because the way the songs were recorded, it's outside the range of whatever the hundreds of parameters are that you set. So that whole experience just kind of got back to for me what I used to do in the original Chameleons I did in my younger years, which they automatically adjust everything, and so I never had to worry about that on my little pirate station, or even when I put it on my college station or the modern rock station I had on the air, and that just caused me to want to go back to what I was doing in the analog days and figure out how to get it into DSP. So now you have Chameleons where there are controls on it, but they're not absolute. So you can set up something that sounds great on voice, but when it encounters music, it's able to dial itself all the way in the other direction. And for the music, and it makes the music sound okay, then when it sees voices again, it just snaps back. So you're just kind of telling it where you want it to center itself, but it can move either way, whether it's in density or whatever. It's kind of neat. It's very different because it came out from me not knowing how to do an audio processor when I was in my teenager years or whatever. I just heard stuff on the radio and I wanted to make a box that sounded like that. And that was just the way I came up with having that sound. So It's a very different approach because of that.
Google will love you, artificial intelligence.
I think Cowboy, with his jumping in and out, his cutting in and out audio, is asking about AI with respect to processing. And so there is a bit of machine learning. I guess it's a bit of a trained expert system in our software that does, in fact, make a bunch of decisions based on some training that we give it. The Corny gives it. He's the trainer. And but then some automated things that, quite frankly, surprise us sometimes. Even the designer, it surprises us sometimes because it's like, wow, why did it do that? And so there is some, some people have this idea that, oh, AI is going to replace everything, and who knows, maybe it will. But when we say there's AI in our software, it's really a highly constrained learning tool that adapts to things that are happening within constraints that are carefully defined. And so, yes, we do put AI on our processors. It says it's an AI studio processor, an AI streaming processor. And that was probably just a little bit of, hey, let's capitalize on that buzz. But I have to say it's probably been just as bad for us as it's been good for us. It's good because people say, oh, that's cool, so that's why it doesn't have all the knobs and twiddles, is because, it has AI in it, and that's true. But then there's some people who look at that and say, but I don't want Skynet controlling my radio station, and so who knows? Maybe we won't play up that fact too much. But the answer to your question, Cowboy, is yes, we do use some AI technology, limited in our software.
I would say generically, part of what allows it to do what it does is that it keeps track of what's going into the box, the raw program audio, and it looks at what it did on the output as a result for that. And then it looks at what's going on right now, and it does these comparisons to determine what to adjust when as things play. So it's kind of like, generically how all the chameleons kind of do their thing. Now, different chameleons have different purposes, so their algorithms could be very different from each other. Like a C level is very different from like a C4 or a C6S because the application is different, where the C level would be more concerned with RMS, leveling, versus what the C4s are doing, where it just takes raw information in and then prepares audio for the end target, user. So what it does is very different from what, like, the C level would do, where the C level assumes there's other boxes downstream that's going to do the loudness part. So I'm not going to do things that's going to, perturb the main box. So that's kind of where the fun comes in with the machine learning things. You can target different applications with it.
In the interest of full disclosure, I want to say something. I don't know if anyone's thought this or not, but I want clarity on this point. Angry Audio, with Corny, we have this product line called Chameleon, and Chameleon has a number of hardware processors and a number of software processors. And so these are made mostly for studio work. We have a multi-band AGC called C level, for example. We have a studio processor, we call that. We have the C4, which is a live stream processor, works perfect for HD3, HD2, and any kind of stream encoding, DAB, for example. We have, I should mention, the C level actually works really well as a television audio processor because it is compliant with Calm. And then we have these software processors, and we probably have some other stuff in the works that we're not going to talk about yet. But this is the Chameleon domain. We have mic processors as well, Smooth and Rebel. The Stereo Toolbox is not a Corny box. So Corny is Chameleon. The Stereo Toolbox is very specifically a product that we're working on in partnership with Timeo. And so that particular box, the agreement we have with Hans, because these guys can't play nice together, is you're not going to let Corny put any of his software in there, right? And I said, well, I wanted to, but I guess if you're saying no, we won't. So the Stereo Toolbox is Stereo Tool in a box, basically. And so that's kind of the way to think about that. And so people have asked me sometimes, they say, well, is there going to be corny code in the stereo toolbox? No, there won't be. But there may be other products that are similar to stereo toolbox that has corny code on them. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Stay tuned. Any other questions? Mark said that the FCC is still down.
And it will be.
I just I'm here in Maryland. We just had the FiOS go down in my area. It just came. That's why we need 5 nines of reliability, not 4 nines. But my question actually goes all the way back to the beginning of your discussion with streaming. I happen to spend a lot of my weekend listening to different sports feeds on my Echo device, and you mentioned calm, and so you have a lot of situations where different portions, as you listen through the broadcast, come from different places, including our newest thing of customized inserted ads for my local neighborhood. So I don't get ads for snow tires, and you don't get ads for suntan lotion or what have you. But there is no agreement on level, and even if you put an audio processor somewhere, unless it's at the point where everything is aggregated, and nobody in the industry that I've seen has discussed that, we need an AGC to bring all these things to a similar level. And you can be sitting there, and suddenly the local station will produce promo that will knock you back in your chair. And then when they get back to the play-by-play, you're hunched over the speaker to try to listen to what the announcers are saying. And I'm wondering, as you look for places to put your product, if you're approaching, people who have aggregation points to discuss, this is really where it belongs now.
Yeah, it's a good point, Ed. And there's no clean and easy answer for this. I mean, ultimately, if we could put the tech that we know how to develop into the listening device, ultimately, where the consumer is, then we could fix everything, right? But barring that, and there've been attempts at this. There are smart TVs now that have some kinds of algorithms for optimizing dial. It doesn't work very well, but you get my point. It's not impossible to imagine that the tech could be in the listening device. However, barring that, which I don't think is going to happen, if we could all agree on a loudness standard, I think it would really help a lot. It wouldn't be perfect, but if we could all agree that contribution, when people are, contributing to some feed that ultimately is aggregating content from different sources, if we could agree that it's all at minus 24 LUFS, for example, it would go a long way to fixing the problem, at least making it a lot more consistent to the end user. And that's minus 24 LUFS at the contribution level, assuming that there's still some destination processor at the last feed. Okay, so I
was going to add to that. You've got that, and in the podcast world, they did a pretty good job at standardizing it minus 16 LUFS. Where what would happen though, and to the point that we just talked about with the levels being all over the place from Ed, I think. What sometimes happens in the podcast world that drives me nuts is you'll get sloppy producers that will put TV audio in the feed, and the TV audio is at minus 24 LUFS. So they'll say, we'll take a break. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we have our little tire thing here. And then the next ad will come in at the normal minus 16, and then it'll blow you away. So you've got a lot of that going on still. So, having something that could, to Ed's point, that would be nice to have that. But at the same time, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it's funny you bring up podcasting because, that's another area where you would think, it's a recording, right? I mean, it's not even live. So they've got all this ability to make great sounding podcast. It's like it's like a recording studio. I mean, okay, maybe not quite, but there's no reason why in post-production they can't optimize it and make it sound great. And yet, the vast majority of podcast listeners complain about the audio. And I think the number one complaint about podcast audio could be fixed if they would just run it through a broadcast processor. That magic box that no one outside of radio seems to know about.
I've got a question
just
or
me.
comment on California's No More Loud Commercials law that was just signed. Are you familiar with this? Takes effect next July.
Yeah, this is
yes.
California.
Yeah. For TV, you already have that.
Yeah.
So
let me read this here. It says requires streaming services to have audio levels. TV has audio, guys.
Yes.
In commercials no louder than the surrounding content, similar to the federal Calm Act. This law extends for the Commercial Advertisement Loudness Mitigation Act standards to streaming platforms, aimed to prevent loud ad breaks from disrupting viewing. Enforcement begins July 1st, and the California Attorney General's office will handle complaints. What could possibly go wrong here?
Yeah, because there's no one person to go after on that, because the TV stations generally aren't in control of what gets injected downstream. So yeah,
you think all the mudslinging and spaghetti against the wall we're living in, and then this pops up. So it must have pissed. Didn't the Calm Act result from some congresswoman in San Jose's mother at the home complain about that? It's pretty much the same thing, right? And but there was a lot of equipment sold for the Calm Act. Did you sell any into that?
Angry Audio wasn't around then, but I got some big bonuses from Telos during that period. So yeah.
Are you saying I'm not the young guy here?
I don't know. I think you might be the young guy.
By the way, I just went into Safari on my iPhone and queried new streaming California level law, and it responded as an AI overview that put all that together. I'm impressed. Huh?
It is impressive.
So who do you go after with that kind of thing? Do you go after Verizon? Do you go after Apple Music? Do you go? You say it's too loud. Well, who?
Well,
where in the chain?
When the Calm Act came into that, I was working at Harris at the time, selling TV transmitters. They went all back up from the station, which is ultimately responsible, then to the network, then to the programming origination people, and it was a real fist fight, And there were benchmarks that people had to make, and basically it came down to the programming, and they cleaned a lot of that up. That was pretty much a fist fight. And I was in the middle of that, having to figure out how to sell against it and all that.
Catfish, did you get John's question here in the chat box? I had to go out of the room. I might have missed that, but did you answer?
Question.
What FM monaural processing features and settings should he focus on for spoken word syndicated programming that is severely bit reduced before we get it?
Yeah, I did answer it. I don't know if my answer is showing up for everybody, but I basically said in the case of the stereo toolbox, there are features for addressing that. It has and people familiar with Stereo Tool will know that there's a feature called delossifier, which I believe is included with every license, and it's certainly included with the Stereo Toolbox. And this will, it's kind of like the declipper, where it attempts to restore some things that are missing. So if he's rebroadcasting stuff that's already been perceptual coded, basically taking crappy MP3s and rebroadcasting them, and who hasn't had to do that? This will breathe some life back into those things, but it's not perfect. It can't be, so, kind of like the declipper. It works pretty well on some things, and it doesn't seem to do much on other things. So I think it's kind of like that. But definitely there are tools for improving things. That's kind of the best answer I can give you. We might be able to make it better. I'm not sure we're going to make it sound great.
Over on Yahoo, Ron is asking, he says, running a mono FM, shouldn't the 32 kilohertz L-R carrier go away, not just the 19 kilohertz part?
Ideally, it'll be good if you turn it off, because it'll help, not having taken up so much space on the band, which will help you with possible multipath situations. So ideally, you should make it go away.
Ron C asks, is there an audio processor that can take an input IP IceCast stream and send that to the internet?
Stereo Toolbox will do that, actually. There's a feature that's in there that may or may not be finished yet, because this is actually pretty recent, where it will subscribe to some kind of a streaming source. I know that he's working on an HLS decoder for it right now, and it may be, he told me it was finished, but Hans is like that, oh, it's finished, it's in there, Yeah. It's like, well, okay, I don't know if anybody tested it yet, but it's actually really good. He does a great job. And so I know he's got an HLS decoder in there, but he's using FFmpeg to do it. So FFmpeg is pretty universal. I mean, it should subscribe to just about everything. And then you can process it and then turn it around and encode it again and send it on its way. So yes, the answer to the question is yes, but the devil's in the details. So I wouldn't say, hey, go buy the Stereo Toolbox and it's going to do this for you. I'd rather, probably engage with you a little bit offline and kind of look at the app and make sure that it's going to do the job for you.
He's also got a note here about the 0 VU equals minus 18 dBFS, LUFS and everything. Corny, you did a presentation, it's got to be 2-3 years ago now, going through all this business of LUFTs, and we ought to resurrect that one and point folks to it, bring it to the top of the BDR list.
We do have a white paper published on the website. How about if I put a link in the show notes? You want me to do that?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a question. You just mentioned 32 kilohertz on the FM stereo broadcast standard. Reducing that or eliminating that? I've never heard of that before.
Oh,
where's 32 kilohertz come from?
His question was specifically, if you're broadcasting mono, shouldn't you not have the 32 kilohertz subcarrier there, or does it, or should it go away? What should I do?
Are you talking about the L-R?
Yes.
Double sideband?
Yeah, so apparently they're doing mono broadcast.
It should be 38, which is
38,
twice the 19. I've never heard 32 before. I've done a lot of CA work. Okay.
Yeah, it's 38.
Yeah, 38. I'm imagining that he's turning off the pilot for mono and wondering why.
Yes.
Well, I've got a question.
Doesn't every stereo generator in the world then turn that off when you turn off the pilot?
Not all of them. Not all of them. Most of them would just turn off the pilot. Yeah. So.
Well, that's a good point then. Yeah.
My experience, which goes way back when, was that you wanted a pilot in there because some receivers scanned and wouldn't stop if it wasn't there. However, it was never mandated. Okay. And a lot of public stations, particularly one down at Tallahassee, I was driving around South Georgia and it was monaural. And the reason they go to monaural is it helps with the multipath, and the stereo reception was distorting. And I don't believe there's any law that says you have to have that on. And I think more and more people are turning it off. What's the consensus here? Particularly if there's talk station.
I know of quite a few like NPR things. If they're just doing NPR talk shows, they'll just go mono for the talk shows and then go back into stereo again for music for that reason, because like the music, at least, there's information that covers up the reception noise that you might get in your radio from multipath and all that. But when you're in talk, you just have this sea of noise around the voices, and they've discovered it once you.
Yeah, they said in downtown Tallahassee, the stereo on the talk show was actually degrading the signals.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they turned it off.
Yeah. Multipath tears you up.
Yes.
Yep.
And it seems like the incidence of those receivers that reacted to the lack of pilot seems to be a thing of the past now, fortunately.
Yeah, particularly on HD radio, huh? There's a solution, guys.
Yeah.
John here breaking in. Thank you. Yes, I will say thank you, Catfish. You did give a good answer to my question. And yes, I've got an AM on FM translator that is running monaural without the stereo pilot.
I've also been involved with 2 different non-com educational builds that were both monaural because they were all spoken word programming. And so none of those 3 signals are running a 19 kilohertz pilot.
Yep.
And I will also say that on 2 of those 3 stations, I've got I won't give the make or model number, but it is a very inexpensive processor with which I've not been altogether happy, and I might be possibly shopping for alternatives, and I appreciate opportunities like this to go to do some window shopping.
Give me a call. We can talk.
Andy, you'll like
Or
this.
call Mary. Call Mary.
Yeah.
But, she'll close it. Yeah.
Back at the student radio FM station that Andy and I were associated with, I took my night kit audio signal generator at 19 kilohertz and injected it on the transmitter. Just for grins. We weren't ready to go stereo. We did about a year later with a real stereo generator. But it turned on the pilot lights, and we were tempted to tell everybody we were stereo then. There's a KMSM story for you.
Yeah. Was that stereo generator or that pilot within 2 hertz?
Well, I don't know if my fingertips were that accurate, Harold. It was a night kit that I built. Does that answer your question?
It was probably being frequency modulated by noise in the room.
So it was just, can I light up the stereo lights? Because people were starting to get them.
Yeah.
At home there.
To go back to what Barry was mentioning real quick here, he mentioned the LUFS and the minus 18 dB and all that. Now, how accurate that statement is depends on what you're using to measure the levels. So if you're going to use, like, say, let's use an old-fashioned VU meter, minus 24 LUFS would be about where the VU meter would sit near 0, but not necessarily so on a peak reading meter. So there's like, so you have a board that's got peak reading meters for levels or whatever, or any of your workstations, those sample peak meters are kind of useless for trying to figure out LUFS or whatever.
Ron was suggesting that it was the Orban software meter that was doing it.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, the Orban software meter it's got loudness meter, so it's got all the right, things on it. But I wanted to make sure that people knew that that's not necessarily a universal thing. Like the Orban meter, yes, that would be the case because it's a loudness meter. But there's a lot of other meters. Well, the most common meters don't give you anything useful. And in fact, I can even, let's see here if I can show it if you want, if we've got time. I can show in a picture what I'm talking about from a previous presentation here.
Now, doesn't the pilot have to be extremely precise?
You talking about the accuracy of the loudness meter?
No, the pilot. As I recall, it was like plus or minus 3 hertz.
2 plus minus 2, which is
it was 2.
These days is no big deal for.
Right.
Did anybody have the McMartin TBM 039, I think it was, which was a heterodyne zero beater? That's what we had at the big 100 kilowatt FM. And you push the button and you'd count. It's like taking a pulse. And it was quite primitive, but it worked. The FCC said okie doke. Anybody have one of those? Am I showing my age again? Even by mentioning the word McMartin.
We had a Bellar. On audio levels, my most recent work has been in cinema, and stuff is calibrated with pink noise, and it's about minus 20 dBFS, but if you do the full frequency range, and so I think it's like minus 18 or something like that. And the pink noise has a crest factor of 12 dB. So there's all these different things to consider as to, how much headroom you have and all that. It gets pretty complicated.
Hey, Cowboy, why don't you try this? Back away from your microphone 4 or 5 feet and see if that lowers the level for it.
Is it over deviating?
doesn't seem to be working.
I don't think there's any deviating on Zoom. That's an FM term, guys.
It seems like his input's hearing the output, because whenever he's on, we could hear ourselves chopping.
What
in
I
and
would do,
out.
Cowboys, I would just sign out and sign back in again. That's might help you clear it.
I think you can also phone in.
Yeah.
Not bad.
I was wondering if it was noise gating and not loud enough.
It sounds almost like the audio is looping background, so when he starts to talk, it hears himself and it ducks everything to keep the echo from happening in the room. Because when his mic is on, we can hear ourselves. I can hear everybody else's voices echoing through his room and chopping out.
As somebody in chat just said, to try some headphones.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, we've hit an hour and a half here, and I don't know, Mike, you have to, Catfish, I got to run away. Corny, you got to run away. I don't know. But Mary Shelby has got something she wanted to pass along, and before she has to run away, Mary, you want to share that with us?
Yeah, I came across an online auction for some used AV equipment. It's an extensive list. I'll put the link in the chat box. It doesn't list who it is, but I believe it is probably Radio Free Asia. So if anybody has any needs, it's like I said, it's an extensive list. So it might be an option for somebody to pick up some equipment that they don't have to pay full price for.
Radio Free Asia was an early Axia customer. Was there a bunch of Axia in there?
There is a bunch of Axia on it, yes.
So you might be right. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Radio Free Asia, but they don't say that, but it just says a radio station, Washington, D.C. But I'd heard some rumblings that they'd laid off a lot of people, and I know that one of the guys that used to work there before he left said that they were gathering some stuff up. So, but I put the link in the chat box. It's an online auction. I think you have to register.
Yes.
One side note is that there's like I think it's an 18% add-on to the bid. So keep that in mind when you're bidding. So
Any
just
500 kilowatt HF transmitters?
I didn't go through all the list. There's like, I think 34 pages worth of equipment, but there's some SM7, some Axia, there was some Comrack, some Studio, some chairs. It's a pretty long list.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd share that with everybody in case they had a need for anything that they could pick up of a bargain.
Tim Sawyer sent it along as well, and this is what I got from Tim, which is essentially what Mary just said, but it has a little more information. I'll just toss it up here on the screen for a couple of seconds.
Is the celebrity auctioneer Carrie Lake?
No.
I would
It's
say,
Rasmus Auctions.
I would say yes. That's the whole Doge deal, and she's that all comes under USIA, I think, and Voice of America.
I think it's shocking though that they're actually selling it rather than just dumping it in a pile somewhere. So we can be actually a little happy about that.
I think other stuff just gets burned, right?
Corny, I don't know if you want to do this or not, but George would like to know how you are handling LUFs. Would you like to show the new LUFs meter, or is it too early for that?
Oh, you mean in our existing stuff?
Yeah, maybe just a screenshot of it. I don't think you have to show it actually working, but
you said you were going to show us something, and you were looking, and then we went off.
Oh, yeah. I was going to show a slide that I had in a presentation I just did that kind of shows the. Let me do that real quick here. So find the share screen. bear with me. I was all set to do this, and the conversation moved on, and I just closed it all out. So let me. There we go.
I'll be honest, I'm asking because I'm kind of having a hard time describing to the staff who's used to VU meters and trying to bridge the gap to LUFS, of which we are woefully very behind here and do not have a good way to do that except through software means. And, you know, it's been a difficult, it's difficult to explain that transition to the more established staff. And then there's the newbies who have no idea about levels, and that's a whole other discussion.
One thing that's kind of surprising, George, I was shocked when Corny told me about this, but there's truth in it. You know, the old timers, us old timers that were used to VU meters weren't that far off the mark. You know, they were actually a lot more useful than we ever gave them credit for. And we left them behind very quickly when peak meters came along, and we lost something in the process.
Yeah,
I won't argue that, but I know a number of people will argue about that.
Yeah.
Well, Western Electric put a lot of work into working out how to do a VU meter.
Indeed.
All right. So on my screen here, now that I'm talking here, what I was that this slide shows exactly what you're trying to show your staff and what Catfish was talking about, where this is an example of two different files that are this matched to the same loudness. And on a loudness meter, it would show as minus 24 LUFS, I think. And on you can see on the VU meters here, showing this meter on the left is showing this track over here, and this meter on the right showing this track over here. And they're both equal loudness to the ear, but a peak meter on the console is showing wildly different levels, where it shows this one is being, well, people will interpret this as being louder than that track, but all it's really showing you is that it's got higher peaks on it than this one over here. So this is where, like, for loudness, like a VU meter actually shows you something a little more, you know, a little closer to that. So if you're at minus 24, it tends to, you know, sit at about 0 VU on an old mechanical VU meter.
Yep.
So that's kind of what I wanted to show.
That can't be right. Those needles should be wrapped around a pen.
You guys know that I was
I
was with PR&E designing consoles for many years. And so many of you have used the boards that I've designed. What you may not know was that there was a protection diode, actually an LED, in the VU meter drive circuit, so that once you got up to, you know, red line, the VU meters would never clack against the edge. They would just kind of soft limit right there at the edge. And that was how we preserved our meters from radio people who thought that there should be no movement. You know?
My college textbook, again, this goes back a ways, and it explains in a sentence, it says, when the VU meter goes abruptly to the pin on the right side, it's called bending the needle.
Yes. Barry,
if you want me to... Your little app there, does that work on computers with only one sound card?
Oh yeah, the little app thing. Yeah, yes, it does.
Because the Orban doesn't, as you and I have discussed.
Let's see here. I can show actually, I know what I could do.
Oh, good.
I've got a version of that running on the C6.
You talking about the angry audio loudness meter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
I don't have a picture readily available, but I can log into my one machine and show people conceptually what it does. So let me find this share. Got it up on the screen here. Here we go.
I have a question for you while you're looking for that. As I've been doing some reading and research to try and further explain and also educate staff, and you know, I'm finding that there is a variety of shall we say, standards when it comes to DBFS. So forgetting LUFS for a moment, but when you have DBFS or a scale in like Pro Tools or Audacity, and trying to explain to people what is 0 VU and what we're looking for, it seems to range anywhere from -18 to -12 to other. Am I wrong? Am I
No, you're absolutely right. We in broadcast, we've tried, and I think unsuccessfully, but we've tried. Many of us that are on the equipment side to force -20 dBFS to be the equivalent of +4 dBu. Okay, because it maintains 20 dB of headroom typically between nominal and clipping. So that's at Telos, we push this really hard. At Angry Audio, these are the standards we use. But you're right. Once you get into Pro Tools world, it gets pretty crazy. And by the way, -12 is a bad idea. If crest factor in typical music content is 16 dB, then -12 dBFS is a bad idea.
And it also depends on what kind of metering they're using too.
Indeed.
And that's a whole nother struggle. Yes.
Yeah. So
speaking of Bob Orban, years ago, and I think this was during the implementation of the CALM Act, he lives here in the Bay Area, but he stopped by the SBE meeting and gave us a pitch. He was delivering, I think, a new TV Optimod with CALM, whatever setup to CBS television here and something. So we got into some discussions about our favorite audio processors of all time. And he agreed with me. Gate stay level. You can't beat it, particularly for disco music. Okay. And of course, and I said my favorite peak limiter of all time is a couple of back-to-back Zener diodes, which leads you to, you haven't discussed composite clipping. Back in the composite STL days, there was people that were actually doing that. I think Eric Small was involved in this and said it was not destructive, but actually had some good parts. What do you guys think of that? Now again, I'm showing my age.
That really takes me back too, because when I first joined Telos, we were still actually building and selling an Eric Small designed composite clipper box.
Yeah.
It's kind of on the tail end of that. And of course, Frank has always been about getting more loudness, cleanly. I don't know if I violated Grady's trademark with that comment or not. And so, he always wanted to do some clipping in the composite domain because you get some loudness basically for free if you don't go too crazy.
Yeah.
All of the modern processors, I think, are doing this. They're using FFT, and they're doing stuff in the composite domain. I know the Stereo Toolbox is doing that.
Yes, like Omni 9 and Stereo Tool, and the Stereo Toolbox.
Yeah.
The main clipper is in the composite domain where they're using FFT to clean up distortion and other products in that domain.
It's clever. It's clever.
Now, when you worked for PR&E, was that up in the new plant in Carlsbad?
It was. Yeah, I don't know what you mean by new. That was the old plant to me.
Yeah, that's years and years and years ago.
Yeah, but, I was a little baby engineer in 1980 something. I started there and worked my way up into management ultimately, and so I was there for quite a while. I think 12 years, something like that.
So did you know Jim Toney? Was he there?
I did. I heard he just passed away a couple of weeks ago. Jim did some. He did. I love Jim. He's such a funny guy.
I worked at Mosley with him. I left there in 80.
Okay. All right. He just passed away a couple of weeks ago, and he had been doing, interestingly, he had been doing some work for me at Angry Audio. He's been doing some contracting work for us, and but not recently. Like maybe the last year we haven't spoken. But he called it beer money. So I'd send him something. I'd say, I can't figure this out, and he'd figure it out. He's a brilliant engineer. But he'd come back and say, he'd say, well, send me $500. It's beer money, so, okay.
So what did you think of his audio limiter at Mosley called the TFL 280?
Never heard it.
That was about the time the Orban came out.
Okay.
And we had quite a following with that. And that meant Tony's friggin' limiter, just like TRC-15
Very good.
Tony's remote control.
Very good.
That's
yeah,
fun.
he designed the voice processor, the analog voice processor in the PR&E production consoles. And that was kind of it was really a thing. People that, I don't think it's widespread, but I think the people who used it really liked it.
I worked with Jim at Continental. We started about the same time. And the TFL, the Tony's friggin' limiter, is a euphemism for the correct name. But he one of the things he designed that I told him he was sharing was the mostly fast attack meters. Remember how those things would just spin up and then stop, and that was his. I thought that was pretty entertaining. How on the STLs those meters would just be so fast.
Just going to say I would like to sign off if that's okay with you guys. Barry, thank you for inviting us to participate today.
Well, thank you, Mike, for Catfish.
Oh, you're
Mike,
signing
whatever
off.
you are.
I'm signing off.
You're signing off just as I'm starting to figure out how to show this meter.
Well, you should show that meter. It's pretty cool. This is Corny's vision of a loudness meter, and I like it very much. I think it's beautiful. So
now that's free
Overmodulate, the screen suddenly has big red letters. Bring it down, dummy.
Someone just said the two nastiest words in the English language to me: free software. Really? Come on. We're
good
trying
to see you, Catfish.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Rolf. Right now it's being built into the C6S, which is the live stream processor, and so that's the way you get it. And yes, it's free, but the processor it comes with is $399, a bargain, really. So
yeah, I'll.
Thanks again for inviting me, and see you all next time.